no matter how challenging it is and how unjust it may be, ultimately, in each and every moment, it is up to us. And it's our choices that are going to determine our future and our destiny. It's choosing in a self-compassionate way, being willing to get the support we need and give ourselves the compassion we need, seek the validation when we need that, but ultimately focusing on what can I do, focusing on my choices.
This is Doctor Talks.
Hello to you all. I'm very grateful today to be able to talk about the topic of trauma through transcendence. Trauma is such a profound topic that affects all of us without exception in different ways. It often doesn't get enough attention in its effect on us, on society, but often it's also misunderstood. And in this sense, I'm so glad that it is being talked about. And today, I have the honor to interview Dr. Fleet Maull. It's really hard to really introduce him. He's an author, he's a meditation teacher. Actually, meditation teacher is a little bit of an injustice because meditation teacher is a very popular term. You can go for a weekend or a month and become a meditation teacher. It's what you call horizontal learning. Dr. Maull is a vertical teacher. He has spent decades training and having inner contemplation, not only in the comfort of being in a nice place in nature, like most of us, but actually being in prison for 14 years on a mandatory minimum federal drug sentence from 1985 and 1999. And in this time, he founded the Prison Mindfulness Institute and the National Prison Hospice Association, catalyzing two national movements. He then founded the transformational educational platform HeartMind Institute, and really has been in the intersection of personal growth and social transformation, being on the leadership of the annual Auschwitz-Birkenau Bearing Witness Retreat for more than 20 years, and founding the Rwanda Bearing Witness Retreat. He is a Roshi, a Zen master in his background, and as we talked before, he's highly trained in Tibetan Buddhism. We shared some teachers over the years, but he's really one of the old timers from the 70s, really. So there is a depth to everything he says. It comes from a place of wisdom, of experience. So I hope all of you take it in. And he's the author of Radical Responsibility: How to Move Beyond Blame, Live Your Highest Purpose, and Become an Unstoppable Force for Good, and Dharma in Hell, the prison writing of Fleet Maull. So with this, I'm honored to have you. Fleet, welcome to this interview.
Thank you very much, Dr. Isaac, for having me. Thank you.
And today you are going to talk about healing trauma and promoting post-traumatic growth through radical responsibility and neuro-somatic mindfulness. So why don't you start maybe by briefly sharing with people your life story so they get a sense of the gravitas between what you are sharing?
Well, you can tell by the gray hair that I'm of the baby boomer generation. And so I came of age in the 1960s. And I grew up in a basically good middle-class family with good middle-class values in the Midwest of the U.S., a Roman Catholic family. But we had alcoholism in the family. And my beloved mother suffered from alcoholism and was kind of what you might call an episodic alcoholic. She would just drink sometimes once a week, sometimes twice a week, every other week. But when she drank, she shifted from being a very creative, beatific, wonderful mother, like my best friend, to being this really, as a young person, a terrifying rageaholic and violent. And so, usually getting home from school, you could tell she'd been drinking, slurring the words a little bit. And then it would just, things would just get worse and worse. And dinner would usually just erupt into absolute chaos. And at some point she would pass out. And then, you'd all be down at breakfast the next morning. I had an older brother and three younger sisters, so five of us with my mom and dad. And we'd all be at breakfast the next morning as if nothing had ever happened. There would be mom, sober, wonderful mom, making breakfast, and nobody ever talking about it. It was never addressed, never talked about, never addressed. So this creates some really deep what I know today and what we know from Western psychology and trauma science and so forth, that creates a real deep splitting in the psyche. Um, and so I came into adolescence as kind of a classic angry young man with a big hole in my gut, which just felt like a black hole of an abyss. If I went anywhere near it, would just be annihilation. So I was trying to fill that in or cover it up, patch it up with anything I could. So, and the other factor was I remembered my early childhood, and this was before the onset, at least before the onset of my awareness of my mother's drinking problems, life being very magical. I remember, up until maybe the time I was 5 or 6, probably up until the time I started school, um, uh, feeling really plugged into reality, things being really magical, and then suddenly that just went away. Everything became gray tones, and I never. Maybe that's a normal developmental process, I know, but I never made peace with it, and I was really hungry to reconnect, to have that sense of being plugged into reality, the magic. And growing up Roman Catholic, the one place, this was pre-Vatican II, so the theology was pretty fire and brimstone, and I never really bought into it. I remember being in kindergarten doing, reciting the catechismal kind of things you do in a Catholic school, and I didn't quite even. I remember clearly having thoughts like, I don't know about this, which is pretty extraordinary when you're 6 or 7 years old. But the pre-Vatican II mysticism of the church was there, the style of the Mass in Latin, the call and response, and I was an altar boy, and I enjoyed that aspect of it. I loved the high masses, the midnight masses. I didn't buy into the theology, but I liked the magic. I was attracted to the magic, right? And so then with the onset of the countercultural revolution in the 1960s, in my sophomore year of high school, I was going to a Jesuit high school. I got a good Jesuit education. They were solid educators. And actually, their kind of philosophy was they wanted you to mature beyond your, childhood catechismal understanding of religion or even of Catholicism, and develop a more mature faith if you were going to. And they were okay if you came out of there as a somewhat questioning agnostic. And at any rate, it was in a comparative religion class in my sophomore year that I first read some Eastern religious teachings, Hinduism and Buddhism. And it was the first thing I ever read that made sense to me, just immediately made sense to me. And so I discovered that, but then I started looking for books. I found Herrigel's Zen and the Art of Archery, and about a German man who went to Japan back in the late 40s, early 50s, and studied with a Kyudo master. And that was his journey with that master was basically a deconstruction of the self and a realization of non-self and essential being. And then I started reading D.T. Suzuki and so forth. So very quickly in that year, when I was 16, 17, I was reading a lot of Zen Buddhism. And that very the summer of my sophomore year, I also discovered marijuana and discovered LSD. So that was all happening then. And then so in the whole counterculture was just unfolding, and I was incredibly angry and culturally alienated. I didn't believe anything. I didn't believe anything that my family had been saying, my culture had been saying. Really, even before that, with the Kennedy assassinations, that which happened when I was maybe in the seventh grade, sixth grade, John F. Kennedy's assassination, and then, I already didn't really believe anything anybody was telling me from the older generation and the adult generation. And then, so that was just continuing on. Then I graduated from high school in 1968, which was an incredibly tumultuous year in U.S. history for people that, like us, that were around then. We had the assassination of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, and the Kent State killings of students on campus and by the National Guard, and it was just incredible. It was an explosive year. The what are they called, racial rebellions, maybe as they're better understood today, what were called riots, were happening all over the place. I grew up in St. Louis, and we had a lot of turbulence and rioting, and every summer, 65, 66, 67. I was also happened to be in Los Angeles during the Watts riots with my family on vacation. So I'm witnessing that in 1965. And I just didn't buy into anything that the culture I'd grown up in was saying anymore. So I was very alienated. And so, as the counterculture came online, I just went headlong into that, and really to the extreme, and with the drug experimentation and the sexuality and the whole thing. And there was some sense of plugging back into some quality of reality with the music, with the drugs, with the sex and alcohol, and also a mixture of a real kind of connection and some mirage like. And if you had a big hole in the gut like me, and a propensity, therefore a very strong addictive propensity, a lot of baggage went with it, right? So those were really tough and tumultuous years. And when the kind of the love and light era of the counterculture started moving into hard drug use and a darker side in the early 70s, I really wanted to escape that. I was involved in it. I became an IV drug user, but I knew I wanted to get out of that. And I also, when Nixon was reelected, I couldn't stand being in the U.S. anymore. So, and I'd always had this idea in South America, I'd rediscover that magic I was looking for. And it wasn't even about drugs. It was just, I don't know where I got that idea. But anyway, I took off traveling and ended up living as an expat down in Peru and fell into small scale drug smuggling as a way to live outside the system. And I justified this with all this us versus them thinking I had going on about the culture was so hypocritic and we were right and they were wrong. And so, all that kind of went, but I was a spiritual seeker all along. So I had these mixed up things going on. And even once I went back and found my teacher and went to graduate school and did a deep 3-year clinical training program at Naropa University in Buddhist and Western psychology, which is now it's now called a program in contemplative psychotherapy. I was still disappearing once or twice a year and smuggling, and I wasn't trying to get rich at it, but just have enough money to keep living outside the system. And my marriage was falling apart, and I was keeping my problems at bay with money, and I was getting deeper and deeper into the Buddhist tradition. And so I knew all this. There was a lot of cognitive dissonance around all this, but I would self-medicate around that, or spend about half the year traveling with my teacher or in retreat, another half the year running around being this crazy person. And so, before all that, I eventually I realized and I stopped, but other people continued on and then they got themselves in trouble and they decided to invite me to the party. So in 1985, I was indicted and on the advice of my teacher, turned myself in. First time I'd actually ever taken anybody's advice, but I did turn myself in. And initially I was sentenced to 30 years with no parole. I was 35 at the time. The paper the next day said I'd be 65 before I had any chance of release. And I pretty much thought my life was over. And as I'd known it anyway, I'd really just torched my life. But what was most devastating was my son was 9 years old at the time, and now I knew he was going to grow up without a dad. And I was absolutely devastated by all that. I had faced that wall of reality of all the incredibly selfish decisions I've been making for so long, despite all the justifications, despite what was going on. Nonetheless, I was clearly making really selfish decisions, and I had to face all that. And that was a real dark night of the soul for me. And so I became radically motivated to get all the negativity out of my life and to take everything I'd received from the positive things from my own family background and all I'd received from my teacher and my Tibetan Buddhist path and really do try to give my son a better legacy than just his dad went to prison or even his dad died in prison, because I'd had no surety that I would survive that time. And eventually, it turned out I was sentenced under the old law, fortunately before 1987, so you get a lot of good time on a long sentence if you stay out of trouble. And then on appeal, they dropped one count. That was about 2.5 years into my time. The appeal went through the court. So my sentence was reduced to 25, and I had to serve 14 and a half on 25. So that's what I ended up serving. But it was really my monastery time, my ashram time. I just was leading this incredibly disciplined life, sleeping only 4 or 5 hours a night and practicing 2 or 3 hours a day, studying 2 or 3 hours a day, and serving. My day job was teaching school. I started a meditation group in the prison chapel. This was a federal prison hospital in the height of the AIDS epidemic. They were bringing all the AIDS patients there from all over the federal system. So men were dying there in horrible conditions from AIDS and liver cancer and heart disease and all kinds of things. So with another inmate, I got the first hospice program in a prison started. And I spent most of my meal breaks and free time and evenings and on weekends up in the hospital taking care of men who were dying. And so I led but we had to be back on our units like at 9 o'clock, and then they locked the door. So from then, I'm just studying and practicing until late at night. And then I would get up very early in the morning and practice. So I led this very disciplined life. Not, I was active in the community. I was teaching and leading programs. I got very involved in 12-step work to deal with my own substance abuse issues. So it was a combination of a deeply contemplative life with a real focus on practice and study while at the same time being engaged. And that was my life for 14 years. So that was a real crucible of transformation for me. And fortunately, I did survive it. And really, I got out in 99, and I've had really nothing but opportunity to serve since getting out. So I'm
Wow.
sorry, that was kind of the long
No, it's
way to go, but that's the story.
such a moving story. Like I'm taking a deep breath because, yeah, the term, Dharma in hell, really, really, and sometimes it takes hell for us to recognize that in the hell there is actually an opportunity, you know, and it's very hard to see it, right? It's how we react to suffering. Do we react with being reactive, or do we see, because that's what the heart does, right? The heart takes all the dirty blood, but it doesn't react. It just connects to the universe and gives and really nourishes, you know. And so I can see really how your approach of personal growth and social transformation, what I introduced initially, is really built into your cellular structure from your experience. And it's really fascinating for me to see how you took personal responsibility into your own truth, but your truth became deeper and deeper as you recognized, okay, yeah, I'm practicing, I want to learn Dharma, I want to meditate, but I'm actually using methods that are hurting people in my family. And you really went all the way. So really, and in this sense, you know, you wrote, your book is titled Radical Responsibility, really how to move beyond blame and fearlessly live your highest purpose. So I think it really suits your story and become an unstoppable force for good. It's really what you've done. So how can you share your approach of radical responsibility, how it can facilitate both trauma healing and post-traumatic growth, both, of course, from your own personal experience and from your wisdom and knowledge over all these years?
Mm-hmm. So that philosophy that I call, that approach to life that I call radical responsibility, was really born of my prison experience. When I got there, I was really consumed with the drama of my own situation, what I'd done to myself and done to my son, if you can imagine. But when I arrived at that federal prison and I saw it was just like, I remember my first couple of days, there was like a Fellini movie of terrible suffering, men who were paraplegics and quadriplegics and blind and emaciated with cancer and AIDS, and then men over medicated in the psych ward. And it was just really an intense place. And the good thing about that, it shook me out of my preoccupation with my own drama, and I realized this was a place of tremendous suffering and that I was here to serve. So that became my focus. But the other thing I saw immediately was I was in a world where it was extremely negative, and where all my fellow prisoners had huge victim stories. Even though the society sees them as perpetrators, most of them end up in trouble and in the criminal justice system because of their own childhood victimization. And they're full of anger, and they armor themselves up with anger and bitterness. So and it's a very polarized culture and just full of anger and bitterness. And I realized that if I didn't proactively do otherwise, I could end up like that. And I didn't want to come out of prison angry and bitter with a big victim mindset, big victim story, but I didn't want to live that way while I was there. Fortunately, I'd had 10 years of deep training in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And I had finished a 3-year clinical program in psychology. So I had a lot of training, a lot of background. And so I realized the only way through, if I was going to survive my time in prison and create any kind of life afterwards, I realized I had to embrace 100%, even 200% ownership, accountability for having got myself in there and what I was going to do with it, right? I just realized focusing on anything else would be a complete waste of time. And, I did a lot of people's time. Because I refused to testify, not because I was trying to be a hard guy or stand-up guy, but I was a Buddhist. And I had the idea that somebody else is going to go to prison instead of me, somebody else's family is going to suffer instead of me. I just couldn't, that didn't work. And so I didn't testify against anyone. So I became the designated kingpin. And, a lot of people testified and didn't go to prison, and I did, even people that were much bigger players than I was. So I could have focused on that. Also, when the government prosecutes you, they break all the rules, they break all the laws, they pay hardball, right? And so I could have focused on all that if I wanted to, and just been consumed by all that blame and resentment and close associates or even so-called friends who had kind of stuffed the knife in my back. But I just decided immediately that's a complete waste of time. It's not going to take me anywhere. And so I got to, take 100% radical ownership responsibility for having got myself in that
Please,
situation.
I want you to continue, but please, but you made one point which for you was in the beginning obvious, but it's key. When you came to the prison and you saw the vast suffering, it shook you off your personal focused personal drama. And this is a key for all of us, for every living being. We get lost in our personal drama and we keep on playing it and we keep on blaming, and time is not waiting for us. We can't be at the moment if we blame and hold something from the past, because we are moving with time. So really for you, this recognition, and it was, I can sense you didn't share it, it was a pivotal transform, maybe the biggest transformation, because all, sorry for the word, BS just fell away, and even all the pretentiousness and I'm better, the other, everything falls away, right? And you are nakedly opened. The reason why I interrupted with this, for people who are listening, this is the moment of opportunity. It always comes, but we have to be aware to recognize it. Otherwise it just goes by and you get upset the next moment. So please, I just wanted to clarify this.
Yeah, no, it is very important, and I'm very grateful for that moment. I think it was the influence of, I had, my family had good values despite the alcoholism, and were community-oriented people. But then my teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, just lived 24/7 in service of humanity. So I think the combination of that background and then coming into this place where literally was a hell realm, it just woke me up, and I'm very grateful that it did. And so then, I had this realization that, I really needed to just radically own my circumstances and the choices I was making. And, these are not new ideas. Obviously, these ideas have been around forever, but unfortunately, they don't dominate our culture. I think our culture is ridden with shame and blame and a culture of blame. But those ideas are there. I often reference Marcus Aurelius. So some people call him the last good Roman emperor, right? He was a Stoic philosopher, and his meditations are great. It's a great book to read. But, paraphrasing one of his statements, something like the vast majority of people think their destiny is determined by their circumstances, but it's not. It's determined by their response to those circumstances, which is very similar to what Viktor Frankl said in Man's Search for Meaning, about that space between the stimulus and the response. Therein lies all of our human freedom and so forth. So, these are not new ideas, but it became a reality for me in a very deeply experiential way. And because I took that approach, also I was very fortunate that Trungpa Rinpoche, my Tibetan teacher, had emphasized skillfulness over simplistic notions of morality. So it was so, like, it's not that he didn't believe in right and wrong, but there are lots of life situations where there's a greater good and a lesser evil, or a greater evil and a lesser good, and you're trying to discern those things. Kind of being able to discern those things is wisdom. But his focus on what's skillful, what are the causes of suffering, what are the causes of happiness, and as we get greater and greater discernment, can we be skillful? So my approach in that prison setting, where the answer to, you try to do anything, the answer is no. You go to any staff, could we try this? Could we try? No. Well, why? Well, if you ask why not, they might lock you up just for being, bold enough to say why not. But if they give you an answer, it's, well, we used to do that, but somebody did this, and now we don't do it anymore. Some prisoner abused her. There's always a story, right? So how can you get anything done? And this was a maximum security prison with a big psych unit, where if you bucked the system, you'd be in 4-point restraints on a concrete bunk, getting hosed down at night and full of Helidol or Thorazine. I mean, this is literal. So you couldn't buck the system. It was a total institution, a totalitarian situation where they had all the power. You couldn't think of being in a more powerless situation. So how do you get anything done? And so I just relied on that philosophy and on my Buddhist training, and I just really tried to work with everybody, my fellow prisoners and the staff, even though I had real clear boundaries. My community was the prisoners. You got to keep real clear boundaries, but I still didn't demonize anybody. And everybody's a human being. So how do you approach people in ways that they'll respond? So I just very patiently and try to be professional and kind and courteous and skillful, but consistent and persistent. And in that way, I was able to create all kinds of programs during my time in that prison that you normally don't happen, or that certainly prisoners don't create, and then create 2 national organizations and 2 national movements. But it all came out of that philosophy of radical responsibility, and also the idea of, because I don't blame them. A lot of prisoners have gotten into really fighting the system from within prison, and I enjoyed some benefits from fights that prisoners had made and paid a high price for in the past through the courts, and then being punished for being involved in the courts and so forth. But a lot of times those kind of things, the pendulum, you win some victories and then you get the pushback, and you win some, I chose the route of getting in relationship with people and getting them to see the value and the wisdom in doing things. So that's the way we got the first hospice program started in a prison anywhere in the world. That's the way we were able to get all these meditations programs going and then get these national organizations going. So I just chose that route and I saw that rather than getting caught up in my, this is terrible, you shouldn't, the blaming or the right or wrong stuff so much, I just said, what works? What's skillful, and where are my choices, and how can I create better? What's the most creative thing I can do in this very powerless situation to try to benefit myself and others in ways that are sustainable? So, that approach created a lot of change, and it stood me well ever since I got out of prison, that same approach. So I often describe radical responsibility as voluntarily embracing 100% ownership for each and every circumstance we face day in and day out. Now, that may sound good or make sense, but if you really think about each and every circumstance, so that includes the ones we can see we had some role in creating, co-creating, allowing, stumbling into, whatever. And this invites us to get radically honest and look at that, not to blame ourselves, but just to learn. Because if I see how I got myself into situations I don't like, I can do something different next time. So it's really important that radical responsibility is a completely beyond blame model. It's clearly not about blaming others, but it's not even one iota about blaming ourselves, and it's certainly not about blaming victims. And so we look in to see how could I have done something different, or where might I have contributed to this? And in that way I can learn. But maybe some situations we may not see anything. We may just not see, unless it was past life karma, and who knows about such things, right? We may see that everybody would agree, I'm a complete innocent bystander, there's no relation. Well, then I'm still going to take ownership for, okay, what am I going to do with this? Am I going to let this take me down and get caught in a victim mindset forever? I mean, it's human. You're going to feel victimized. People are terribly victimized. But am I going to get stuck there? Or am I going to shift into, okay, this is terrible. Maybe this is unjust. It shouldn't happen to anybody. But here it is. It happened. It's in my lap. What am I going to do with it? Am I going to let it take me down? Or am I going to get creative and find the most creative way I can respond to this to move my life forward in a beneficial way? And if I'm thinking long term, that usually is at everybody else's benefit as well. So it's that idea of radical ownership. And it goes back to another influence. There was I can't remember his first letter, Edward Deming, who's often called the father of American manufacturing. And a lot of this, if people know about that world, Six Sigma and continuous quality improvement, all those kind of ideas go back to him. Uh, um, he helped Japan. He had the resurgence. So after World War II, the Japanese economy was largely his doing, and then American manufacturing and so forth. Anyway, he had this simple model. He had a line. And above the line, he had responsibility, ownership, accountability. Below the line, he had blame. I think he had ours a little more, I think justification, maybe resentment, and then shame, which meant blaming yourself. And he said it's very normal and human to deflect blame and blame others, to justify our own behaviors, to blame and shame ourselves, or to hold on to resentments. It's just all normal human psychology. But it's just his point of view was it's inefficient. It's just ultimately it's a waste of time and energy. That the only place we have any power is with our choices. That's the only place we have, because we can't control other people. We can't control the world. The only thing we have any real control with and influence over is ourselves and our own choices and behaviors, and that's challenging enough. So the idea here is to really, be in an environment of complete self-compassion, understanding that we may be having very difficult feelings, and we may have been victimized, and we may need a lot of support around that or have that validated, but ultimately our future is going to be determined by the choices we're making today. And are those choices that are going to be life affirming, empowering, and move us forward? Or are they going to be choices that take us into debilitating mindsets that keep our life stuck or take our lives backward? And no matter how challenging it is and how unjust it may be, ultimately, in each and every moment, it is up to us. And it's our choices that are going to determine our future and our destiny. So it's choosing in a self-compassionate way, being willing to get the support we need and give ourselves the compassion we need, seek the validation and when we need that, but ultimately focusing on what can I do, focusing on my choices.
Oh, so it's for the listeners, we all go through moments, that we can blame ourselves and we can feel shame, and we go through moments that we feel good with ourselves if we are fortunate. And because we all go through it, we're also built in this way. Every cell in our body has this survival drive. When it has a boundary, it takes what it wants, it pushes out what it doesn't want, and it creates this judgment that this is good for me, this is bad for me, and it creates a relationship with the environment, actually on a cellular level, that's the amazing thing. And as a result, all the way to the cells, we become reactive, It's a physiological, biochemical reactivity, which is an expression of all these words of wisdom that you answered. So it's built in us. So this is really our maintenance survival mode, what the prisoners were doing in prison, and it really didn't work for them. It's a losing proposition, and that's why it leads to suffering and to pain. And it's a perpetuated trauma. But yet, this concept about responsiveness, tukje, responsiveness, it's built in us because our heart takes all the dirty blood with open arms. It doesn't say, I won't take it from the liver, I won't take it from the kidneys. It takes it, and instead of fighting, it recognizes we are part of a bigger society of the universe through the air. And then what does the heart do? It gives without discrimination, right? I tell this a lot. So the heart just gives. That's our love for others. But after it gives, it relaxes and it nourishes itself. And when we connect with our heart, blame and shame cannot exist because we are nourishing all others with love and compassion without judgment, and we are nourishing ourselves. That self-love is part of loving others. And you said a sentence about it in the beginning that people who are not trained may miss. You said, I knew I need to do this to help myself and others, So you took the action to live this life. You actually brought it to the way that you live, to the contact, to the skillfulness. And, I bet your psychological training as a psychotherapist and having clinical also was very helpful. But for the audience, we are built to do this, what is called fixing, for example, in Kabbalah, tikkun. We are built to do this. We are wired to do this. And this is why your approach, what you are saying, what you are sharing, is not theoretical. Each and one of us is capable of doing it. And some, the stuff they get back is more refined. They'll be more evolved. It will be faster for them. We can learn from them, but we're all on this journey. And in this sense, maybe you can share with us what's unique about your neuro-somatic mindfulness approach to meditation and how it facilitates both trauma healing, which we need, and post-traumatic growth.
Yeah, it very much builds on what you're just talking about. And it's very important what you said because we're kind of dual wired as human beings. We're wired for survival. And so there's a paradigm of survival, and we have this fear and survival oriented psychology and wiring, literally. And there's something called the negativity bias that causes us to develop a long-term memory, mostly full of memory of threat and negativity, and then we spin things to the negativity. So that's the human condition. And the human condition unexamined is a life sentence to a life of fear and survival and really victimization. But that same there's nothing wrong with the human condition. That same human condition, if we examine it, if we have a practice, if we're doing the inner work, that very same human condition is the platform for our awakening. And there's nothing to throw away there. It's all good. And I think along with having deep self-compassion as a foundation for radical responsibility, also developing the recognition of our own innate goodness, what in the Buddhist tradition is called Buddha nature, but could be called Krishna nature or Christ nature or divinity. Trungpa Rinpoche just called it basic goodness, our innate, unconditional basic goodness. And so neurosomatic mindfulness, I'll talk about it in a number of ways, but it's a path of meditation that accelerates the journey into the depth of our being, where we can experience beyond a shadow of a doubt our own innate wholeness, our unbrokenness, even the part of our being that's never been affected by trauma, that we experience, that all the messages we've been receiving our whole life that we weren't enough, or we weren't this, or we weren't that, all the messages, that are just, the culture is so full of, in fact, it drives our consumerist culture, right? You're not enough, but if you own that or you buy that, you just might get your needs met. So, we've all heard that our whole life in one degree or another, and it's all a lie. We are completely innately whole, good, wise, intelligent, beautiful human beings. Now, if one can even just read that and take that on as a possibility, that could be very helpful. But if you actually experience it directly through contemplative means, it changes everything, even just touching it a little bit. And then, of course, your practice is developing greater and greater faith and confidence in that. You know, it's been said in the Buddhist tradition, across traditions, that the basic difference between a fully awakened being or a Buddha and the rest of us, who are also all already Buddhas, is that the awakened being recognizes their Buddha nature and has confidence in it and thus can live from it. So even once we glimpse that, we have to work to develop that confidence in it.
Yeah.
So the way neuro-somatic mindfulness does that is it's intentionally a very deeply embodied approach to the practice. Now, a lot of teachers, including my first teachers, talked about the body, including the body, but our culture is so disembodied. Our Western culture is so disembodied. In fact, I have a friend that says in Western culture, the body's been relegated to the role of being simply a brain taxi, something to carry around this supercomputer that's on our shoulders. And because of that, even when we meet these Eastern traditions and traditions of meditation, and maybe the instructions being given relatively well, but we don't hear it, and we just practice from the neck up. And, you know, we're dealing with this overactive default mode network
So
and
we,
this
we, we
thinking.
practice from the neck up, but even in Eastern tradition, being in the Himalayas, we can practice from the skin out. You
Yeah.
know, we can have this spaciousness, yet we are totally disconnected with what's happening inside, you know?
Yeah, there's not
Eh,
enough emphasis on interoceptive awareness. When you go into the inner yogic practices, there is, but
Right, of
still, if
course.
you haven't really been introduced to it in different ways, you may miss it in a certain way. So this practice is very neuroscientifically informed, and it's based on my study of the growing emerging field of neuroscience over the last 30 years, and how we can deeply enhance interoceptive, the body's capacity to feel itself from the inside out. So all the instruction in neurosomatic mindfulness first gets us in touch with a sensation on the surface of the skin from head to toe, and really getting that in a universal sense, very importantly. And that goes through one set of neural networks of the brain, which is highly myelinated, thus we're very sensitive to touch because myelinated neural networks are more efficient. But then, and we can develop like a womb-like structure of really feeling held in our awareness of the external sensate field, the contact between our body and the space surrounding us, which is energetically ultimately a very fluid boundary, but in relative terms is a real boundary. But we can feel that, we can regard as space as benevolent and feel held within that, like the embrace of a mother and child. And then within that, we feel greater safety and we can dive deeper and we start exploring the internal landscape. And our body is sensory all the way down to the bones and including the bones, all containing neuronal cells, the marrow of the bones, the outer white hard layer of the bones, the circulatory system, all the vital organs, the glands, the lungs, the heart, the everything, the musculature, it's all sensory. And it's subtler because it goes through different neural networks of the brain. But over time, we can develop a more and more refined awareness. And that brings us deep into the body. Now, the real key here, there's two real keys to this. One is that we know from current neuroscience that our busy mind that makes it hard for people to meditate when they first try is called the default mode network, because when we don't focus our attention, the mind is constantly ruminating about the past, the future, the present. It's very busy. But when we focus our attention, it naturally quiets down because we activate something called the task positive network. Anybody who's tried to like thread a needle, you know, for at least a moment, your mind gets very quiet. You may not be able to sustain it.
So
But that's
true.
that shift from the default mode network to the task positive network. So by yoking your attention with the body, what my first teacher called synchronizing body and mind, but taking that deep all the way down to the bones, feeling the body ever more deeply, it creates a platform for your mind to rest, and the default mode network quiets down. You don't have to struggle with your thoughts. It just quiets down naturally. So you find yourself going into deeper and deeper attention stabilization and then deeper and deeper awareness. And as you're doing that, because you're getting a lot of internal data, the mind, the brain, and the nervous system is learning how to do that. So you start with self-directed self-regulation, which any practice begins with. And gradually, your body, mind, heart system is learning to do it. So it's gradually moving into auto-regulation, which means you can move from a more dualistic practice into a more non-dual practice.
Right.
The other thing that's happening is as you go deep into the body, you're starting off with a, gross physical body. But even if you close your eyes, those sensations now, they somehow seem almost more mental than physical. But the deeper you go into the body, you're getting into subtle sensation and subtle body, and then you're getting into subtle mind, and then you're getting into the very depth of your being and in the depth of our true nature, right? So this approach helps us shift from a dualistic approach to a non-dualistic approach to meditation much more quickly. And it takes us into the depth of our being much more quickly, where we can experience the reality of our innate unconditional goodness. And so I find that
I
people
want to
can,
make a
yeah.
few, because I know I'm usually in your place and I want to share and share. But
Mhm.
you made some really important points for us, for the people in the audience that want to make sure they don't miss. What Fleet is saying, even if you taste it for a second, we all have the capacity to taste it. We are built to do it, right? It's the Buddha nature. It's made in the image of God, but B'Tselem Elohim. It's all the same. We are built to do it, even if for a second, even in between being angry. This second, when we recognize it, is life shifting on an experiential level. It's very important. It's very easy to talk beautiful words. But when you experience, our reality is never the same. And that's really what Fleet is referring to. And the other thing it is referred to is whatever is your experience, if you fixate on it and say, wow, this is amazing, this is it, you are missing the next layer. And so Fleet is talking here, he's talking about it from a somatic experience to subtler and subtler and to the bond and to the cell. Like, lately I was meditating here on the ocean and I was telling my family, I had the experience and I've never taken any psychedelics. It was like cellular happiness. It sounds crazy. Every cell in my body was vibrating with happiness. It's like, maybe it's what people feel when they are on drugs, But yeah, I have a lot of reasons to be stressed and worried right now. I can make a long list, but there was something about connecting with this quality, which is not mine. It's out there. And really what you're offering is a wisdom lineage based that was adopted to our needs to connect with this. So what I would like to do, if okay with you, and I know we already spent a lot of time, but I want, if you have a few more minutes, is maybe you can share with people where they can find more about your work. And then maybe if we have enough time, lead us in a short meditation. So people who don't have time to sit and experience will know how to find you. And those who want to stay, and I recommend to stay, can actually stay.
Absolutely. So people can find my work at my basic website, fleetmaull.com, and you can find your way to other places through there. My courses are at heartmind.co, heartmind.co. There you can find about all our online summits and my course, neuro-somatic mindfulness course, is there. And if you're interested in the prison work, prisonmindfulness.org. But if you go to fleetmaull.com, you'll kind of find your way through all that. Or if you want to go directly to my book site, it's radicalresponsibilitybook.com. And right now, if you order the book online through there and you put your receipt, you order it at Amazon, whatever book seller, put your receipt in there, there's a whole lot of bonuses offered because the paperback edition just came out. So that's enough to get people oriented to find out about my work. So, yeah.
Great. Okay, so please, maybe I know it's short, but maybe you can take 10, 15 minutes and
Yeah. So I invite all of us in the audience to just take a posture that you feels relatively uplifted, upright, and at the same time relaxed and sustainable. Now, for you, that means you can kind of sit forward in your chair or sit on a cushion and sit up with a relatively upright posture, extending the crown of the head towards the ceiling a bit, letting the rest of the body relax around that. But if for any reason of physical limitations, you need to lean back in a chair or do the practice lying down or standing up, please do what works for you. So then, having established your posture, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes for this. Now, I generally teach eyes open meditation, but to really connect with this internal landscape of sensation, it helps to close the eyes to begin with. And to begin with, I invite us just to simply drop into being. Just let ourselves be just as we are. And if we note ourselves doing anything, even trying to meditate, let that go and just come back to being. Just being. Just being. Nothing to do, nowhere to go, nothing to accomplish, nothing to prove, just being. Simple presence, simple beingness. within that, I invite us to begin feeling the body. To begin with feeling sensations on the surface of the skin from head to toe. Perhaps sensations at the contact points between your body and the chair, the cushion, your feet, and the ground. Tingling sensations, prickly sensations, sensations of warmth or coolness or numbness. Perhaps the texture of your clothing, the weight of your clothing, the contact between your skin and your clothing. Sensations related to the air temperature or movement of the air where you are on exposed skin surface areas like the face or the neck, the hands. And moment after moment, just gradually connecting the dots from head to toe, all across the surface of the skin, sides, back, front, soles of your feet, scalp, just feeling all the sensations you can feel. And we're working here with actual sensation. When I say the body is simply a word or a concept, and we actually have a kind of conceptual psychosomatic body that's made up of thoughts and images. But here we're talking about actual tactile physical sensation, literally feeling the sensations as directly as we can. And we can begin to feel ourselves enveloped in a sensate field from head to toe, the boundary between our body and a space surrounding us. And of course, we generally regard space as empty, but it's actually made up of gases and so forth, and it's tangible. So we could feel ourselves being held by the space and regard the space as benevolent. And so as we're weaving together the sensate field through our awareness of it, from head to toe, we feel somewhat held within the benevolence of this space, much like a child, an infant embraced by their mother or father. And we can relax further in there, feeling the safety of that. And then you're invited to begin exploring the internal landscape of sensation. So the weight and mass of the muscles and bones, the force of gravity holding us down on the earth. All the sensations we can feel with each in-breath and out-breath. The passage of air across the nostrils or parted lips, the expansion and contraction of the rib cage, the contraction and relaxation of the diaphragm muscle driving the breath, the rising and falling of the belly, abdominal muscles, intercostal muscles between the ribs. There's this whole flow of sensation with each in-breath and out-breath. As the air just flows in and out of the body, there's all these sensations we can feel. And there's this flow of sensation with the breath just going in and out of its own accord, just like waves lapping at the seashore. So tuning into that, making a gentle effort to feel ever more deeply. And initially, we may have a sense like, I'm observing these sensations or I'm feeling these sensations. But as best you can, try to drop into just feeling directly, feeling sensation throughout the body. Perhaps as we slow down, you can feel the heartbeat, pulse. And being particularly curious about any sensations of discomfort in the body. There's always some discomfort. Physical sensations, and all perceptions for that matter, arise across a spectrum from pleasant to neutral to unpleasant. And that's just the way it is. And we're, of course, addicted to comfort, and we live in fear of discomfort. We chase pleasure and comfort. We avoid discomfort. We're kind of hardwired that way, but that keeps us very mechanically on autopilot. So one strategy for awakening is to lean into discomfort, to actually be willing to feel any kind of unpleasantness or discomfort or pain. And this isn't about seeking that or punishing ourselves in any way. Not at all. It's just part of our experience. It's always there. So we can choose to really reclaim our dignity as conscious human beings by just saying, I'm going to embrace the whole thing. Comfort, discomfort. I have a human body. I'm going to experience this my whole life. I'm going to choose to embrace the whole thing. So breath after breath, heartbeat after heartbeat, letting your attention drop ever more deeply into the body and focusing on feeling. feeling sensation ever more deeply. And as you go along, you could focus on a particular part of the body. You could focus on your legs or torso or chest or head, or you could just feel globally or focus on the breath. But allow this focus on feeling sensation to draw you ever more deeply into the body. And as we're doing this, we're cultivating attitudinal qualities of almost passionate curiosity. How deeply can I know myself in this moment? How deeply can I feel my own body? Can I really come home to the body and all the way down to the bones? So challenging myself and being deeply curious, but at the same time having qualities of acceptance, self-compassion, openness, freshness, beginner's mind, and just meeting whatever's there with curiosity. So feeling ever more deeply into the body. And of course, anytime the mind wanders, we find ourselves distracted, we just come back. Other than that, we just let thoughts come and go, other sense perceptions, sight, sound, smell, just let it all be as it will. Let it all come and go, and just keep coming back to feeling the body ever more deeply. The muscles store kinetic energy at rest. We can feel that. There's like a low hum of energy in the muscles. There's this vast internal somatic universe of sensate experience. And the more deeply we go into it and the more directly we feel it, we naturally find the mind getting quieter and quieter. And our attention and awareness can begin to rest in this internal flow of sensate experience. That we can begin to feel almost at the cellular level, this kind of dynamism, this aliveness throughout the body, the flow of energy and sensation throughout the body from head to toe. Actually, the more our awareness deepens in the body, our internal systems begin to cohere. There's so many different frequencies of energy in the body, the brain waves, the heartbeat, our breath. Every organ, every gland has its own energy frequency, and they begin to cohere. We begin to feel this internal flow, this resonance, this coherence. And it becomes so palpable, we can actually rest our attention there, our awareness there, and it becomes easier and easier to rest in effortless mindfulness, effortless awareness. And this deep flow is very nurturing and healing. It heals trauma. And it gives us a completely different place from which to live our lives. This deep quality of being. So with this enhanced internal somatic awareness, I invite us again just to drop into being. Just let go of any effort and simply be. Just being and feeling. Just being and feeling. Just being and feeling. And to the extent that we find ourselves in a state of beingness, to whatever degree, we could have a simple inquiry within this quality of pure being, pure presence. Is there anything missing? Is there anything that would make this moment more complete? Or is it really complete within itself? And this pure quality of just physical, emotional, cognitive, spiritual beingness, presence. Allowing myself to simply be as I am in this moment, moment to moment, at greater and greater depth, and resting in that. And when you're ready, continuing to rest in this deep state of being and somatic awareness, you could open the eyes and look out and just get a sense of what the external world feels like when you're more in your body, when you've come home to the body, and when you're in touch with this deep state of flow. And from there, you look out at the world and perhaps have an interesting experience.
Thank you so much for sharing this experience, and really, I hope people will take it in. If I just to close a few terms that for people like Fleet and me are familiar, but Fleet was guiding you from observing as an outsider, looking into feeling, into leaning into the difficulty, leaning into the experience. Then he used the term mindful effortlessness. And that's a very tricky term because you can be mindful into being contracted and looking at one thing, but you really like Milarepa said, the hardest thing is to be effortless. We are putting our ability to focus, to hold, into just completely letting go. And this is a term of resting. Resting is not like we go to sleep, is we rest any tendency to hold, any tendency to contract, any tendency to be reactive. And then we just accept. There's a deep quality of acceptance in what you are really saying. It's almost like a prerequisite. So really, wow. Thank you. I'm so glad for the opportunity to connect with you and looking forward to many more conversations.
Thank you very much, Isaac. Equally so. It's a delight to meet you, and we have a lot of similar background, and I'm sure we can have some fascinating conversations. So I look forward to more.
Of course. Thank you. And thank you everybody for listening. And please, this is a talk worthwhile listening a second and a third time.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. Talks. We hope today's episode has enlightened and inspired you on your path to optimal health. Each day is a new opportunity to make choices that empower your well-being. For more insights and strategies, subscribe to our podcast and visit our website, www.drtalks.com. Stay connected, stay healthy, and join us next time on Dr. Talks, real talks from real doctors on the issues that matter to you most.